25 days took the SU-152 from sketch to prototype, and it was not even meant to hunt tanks. Yet, in the Second World War, this blunt Soviet assault gun became one of the Soviet forces' most feared answers to German armour. The reputation came almost by accident. After Operation Uranus trapped the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, Soviet troops had survived street fighting, winter, and the first encounters with Germany's new armoured zoo, Tigers, Panthers, and later, elephants. They needed something heavier, fast. But the real crisis was not tank dueling. Frontline units were being asked to smash cities and fortifications with weapons that could no longer keep up. They had artillery and combat engineers, but most of the guns that mattered had to be dragged by tractors or horses. Early 76mm tank guns could not reliably tear open bunkers. In ruined streets, the infantry needed that kind of power right beside them. Deep snow, broken roads, ambushes and counterattacks made towed guns a liability. When crews were killed or forced back, the gun was often left where it stood. The Soviets had met this problem before in the Winter War against fortified Finnish bunkers. The KV-2 tried to solve it with a 152mm howitzer in a huge turret. In practice, that turret made the tank overweight, top-heavy, awkward, and hard to build. The answer was to take the power out of a turret and bolt it into a simpler armoured box. The Soviet army wanted a heavy self-propelled gun with the 152mm ML-20 howitzer, real crew protection, and a production plan that did not waste time. Development barely paused for breath. The first prototype, known as Object 236 or KV-14, was finished in 25 days. Engineers used the KV-1S chassis and an existing gun, then rushed the trials. Within weeks, the design was accepted for service. Production started at once. From the first idea to mass manufacture, the whole jump took about 4 months, and in the next 10 months, Soviet factories turned out roughly 700 SU-152s. The machine weighed about 45 tons, because almost everything served the gun. Its ammunition came in 2 pieces, just under 50 kilograms per shot. The usual high-explosive shell carried about 6 kilograms of trinitrotoluene, enough to erase a bunker or bring down a small house with a single hit. Loading was brutal in the cramped compartment, so the rate stayed near 2 rounds a minute. It carried only 20 rounds, but most targets did not need a second one. As Kursk approached, the vehicles went into independent, self-propelled artillery regiments. Crews were trained in a hurry, and the first 12 were sent toward Kursk. On July 6, 1943, a battery of SU-152s set an ambush. The targets were the new German Ferdinand heavy tank destroyers, later renamed Elephants. They were among the most heavily armoured vehicles of the war, with 200mm on the front and about 25 tons more weight than the Soviet gun. At 800 meters, the first Ferdinand was hit and burned. The shell did not have to punch through cleanly. A 152mm blast could cave in armor plates, shower the inside with spall, and kill the crew through shock alone. One recorded hit even flipped a Panzer IV. Heavier armor-piercing rounds came later, but tanks were not their main purpose. Against this weapon, high explosive or armor-piercing could both be ruinous. The armor-piercing shell was closer to a concrete breaker. It drove deep into a fortification, then burst inside. Ferdinands created a strange problem. Their armor was so thick that a heavy high-explosive hit often killed the crew with blast and spalling, yet left the vehicle repairable. At night, German recovery teams could drag most knocked-out machines back, fit a new crew, and send them out again. Soviet crews were later told to keep firing until a tank was completely destroyed. In the following days, more Ferdinands were knocked out, along with Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer IVs. That is where the SU-152 earned the name Zvereboy, the Beast Slayer. The fighting around Kursk was still chaotic and costly. It had not been built as a tank destroyer. The tank killing was the side effect of an enormous shell. After Kursk, commanders used the SU-152 more often against heavy German armor because the results were hard to ignore. Its protection was serious at first, then less reassuring as German guns improved. The front and casemate carried roughly 65 to 75mm of armor, sloped at 30 degrees, close to KV-1S standards. The sides were flat 60mm, and the rear only 30. That could stop some frontal fire, but German 88mm guns remained dangerous even from far away. The newer L-7188s on heavy tank destroyers were worse. Powerful, accurate, helped by better optics and faster to reload. The SU-152 had the opposite problem. It aimed slowly, fired in a high arc, lacked fine accuracy, and took a long time to correct and shoot again. Designed to lead attacks with infantry, it often proved more useful behind the first line. From about 200 meters back, it could support the leading infantry and tanks without being the first target. When a bunker or strongpoint stopped the advance, the SU-152s moved up and removed it. In city fighting, they were valued for an even harsher reason. Instead of infantry clearing rooms, the gun could bring the building down on its defenders. Early vehicles had no secondary weapon for close infantry threats. The crew was expected to rely on PPSH submachine guns and grenades. Later, many received a 12.7mm DSHK heavy machine gun on the roof, useful against aircraft, infantry, and light armour. A 12-cylinder diesel gave about 600 horsepower, and the wide tracks helped a 45-ton vehicle move well. But the machinery was working hard. Inside, the breech, shells, and fuel tanks swallowed the compartment. Ammunition and fuel sat together. One tank was beside the driver, who could not easily escape unless the gun was traversed left and the breach cleared the way. 5 men rode inside the SU-152, and a shell fragment punching through the armour could turn that cramped box into a furnace. The driver, gunner, and loader sat in a row on the left of the gun breech. Opposite them were the breech operator and the commander. Firing the weapon was brutal. A huge muzzle brake helped tame the recoil, but only so much. On paper, the gun could reach 6,000 meters. In practice, accuracy was already falling off after 800. That was acceptable because the SU-152 was always a stopgap. Its aging KV-1S chassis was unreliable and increasingly underarmed, but the gun and the idea behind it worked. The Soviets put the concept onto the newer IS platform. The result was the ISU-152, with 90 to 100 millimeters of frontal armor. Now it could move straight at a target, take more punishment, and crush it with the same heavy gun. City fighting shaped its tactics. Infantry with submachine guns stayed close, usually with a sniper, and sometimes a flamethrower. They screened the assault gun from German anti-tank teams while it broke open strongpoints. The DSHK anti-aircraft gun helped too, especially against attacks from upper floors and rooftops. But high explosive was not a cure-all. Against tanks at long range, faster guns were still more accurate. So near the war's end, Soviet designers tested high-velocity weapons on the ISU-152, creating high-power variants. Those experiments used several guns, with Object 246 the standout. Armed with the BL-8, it could pierce more than 200 millimeters of armor at 2,000 meters. By then, the Soviets had built a wartime family of assault guns and tank destroyers, each with a job. The Su-76 was small, lightly armoured, mass-produced and mainly for infantry support. It was also exposed to nearly everything on the battlefield. Crews called it Suka, a bitter nickname tied to thin armour, constant breakdowns, and a habit of getting them killed. The Su-85, and later the Su-100, were built for German tanks. The heavy SU and ISU-152 machines were the all-purpose wrecking tools. By the war's end, ISU vehicles were replacing older SU machines, and production ran until 1947 with around 4,000 built. After the war, the assault gun idea faded fast as the main battle tank took over its role. Heavy, self-propelled artillery did not vanish. It simply moved farther back, becoming a long-range fire support weapon rather than a machine for direct assaults.